Chapter 13.2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Edited by Crimson Wolf. Oichi's fingers that were wrapped around my big member began moving on their own, almost like they were different living beings, focusing on the weak spots of my penis and frenulum. It was still growing bigger through her stroking. The muscles along my spine began trembling softly, and the burning sensation in my hips began reaching its climax. As I tried not to show my impatience and keep up my appearance, I ordered Oichi to stop her service. My words made my dear wife a little hesitant. Did I apologize? Did Oichi do something uncomfortable to Nagamasa-sama? No, that's not it. It was really good, Oichi. I lifted my upper body and embraced Oichi. My actions made a relieved expression appear on her face, and she let out a relieved sigh in my embrace. She gladly accepted a kiss I threw at her as she looked up at me from my chest, a happy look on her face. Starting with small kisses, we gradually entwined our tongues and continued exchanging deep kisses. Then, as I moved my body lower, I could see that Oichi clung to me with an expression of wanting more kisses. If Oichi's mother, Dodaguzan, were to see this, she would without a doubt faint immediately. Oichi. I want to enter you now. Fua. Yes. I understand. Oichi, who was still immersed in the aftertaste of our French kissing, was gasping wildly. However, even though she said I understand, it seemed she didn't know how to place a man's penis inside her vagina. Ordering Oichi to sit on her knees above me, I told her to lower her hips above my big and excited member. Following my orders, she exposed her true face, succumbed to her carnal desires, and finally, after whispering, "Please don't look," she devoured my big member with her wet, sloppy hole. On. It went in. While making faint splashing sounds like water, Oichi, who devoured my big member to the entrance of her womb, eventually collapsed onto my chest. Read the original on https://dao.ist. It's so big. So deep. My meat pole was buried in Oichi's warm and soft vagina, making the burning sensation from before return as my hips trembled. Not yet, I couldn't let it end there. Oichi, lift up your hips slowly. After a slow nod, just as indicated, Oichi desperately lifted up her hips. Now drop your hips low enough that your clit hits my abdomen. Yeah. AAA. Oichi's hips descended, and her vagina clamped down tightly. Responding in kind to her, I began rubbing from her hips down to her butt with my hands. Now, just as I taught you. Try doing that over and over again. From there on began Oichi's clumsy offensive. Trembling softly, Oichi's hips lifted slowly and firmly dropped back down, locking our hips together. The movements didn't have much vigor, but the figure of my wife desperately doing her best was quite tasty to watch. Being able to get aroused just by one's patterns and actions was one of sex's best points. Speaking of which, while I was enjoying the feeling of ejaculation that was slowly creeping its way to my hips, I brushed Oichi's disarranged hair aside. She was completely captivated with moving her hips up and down. At any rate, the peerless woman's face on top of me was slowly melting away with pleasure as her mouth hung half open. She was trying to shake her hips with all her might even though she wasn't used to doing it. No man would not become excited from such a view. While desperately suppressing the burning desire to start moving my own hips, I decided to enjoy the warm sensation of Oichi's inside thoroughly. Nagamasa-sama, Nagamasa-shwama. Oichi was calling my name with heated breath from her charming mouth. To answer her call, I brushed behind her ears, which made her insides tighten up. Read the original on https://dao.ist. Figu. Nagamasha-sama, Gu. Filled with more pleasure than she could handle, she became unable to articulate properly, and with seemingly empty eyes she still spoke to me. Slowly drowning in carnal desires while desperately trying not to lose sight of me, made the affection I held for her increase even more. The more we rubbed each other's skin, the stronger our feelings for each other became. It was not the same intense intercourse that we usually had, this time we were taking it slow. The feeling of slow sex was actually pretty good. Nana. Fua. Ha. Chu. Kuchu. Pulling Oichi's head closer to my own, I lusted for her lips. Entwining our tongues, I sucked on it, and while playfully biting her, I kissed her deeply. Oichi's hips trembled every time she moved, and she clung to my body. Contrary to how we usually did it, this time she was the one drowning me in her sweet saliva. In the heat of the moment, it felt a little like she was marking her territory. From this, I could understand just how much she was thinking about me. However, after just a few kisses, I became unable to control my lower body. Even though they were only sweet kisses with Oichi, they made me unable to hold on to my ejaculation. I whispered somewhat clumsily, "I'm coming," into Oichi's ear, who was still shaking her hips and making sloppy sounds. She then entangled both arms around my neck and pressed her lips against mine. "You. Coming. Ah. Fua. Ah." A dull feeling ran in between my legs, and thick, rich semen spat out the mouth of my penis along with a dripping sound. With a dull and soft sound, I injected my semen into Oichi. It was all gulped down and carried to the inside of her womb to the pulsing of her insides. Fua. It's coming. Nagamasa-sama's thick stuff is. Ah. Being poured into my womb. Oichi embraced me with her entire body, trembling as she immersed herself in her climax. It seemed that Oichi's womb and vagina had completely memorized the sensation of my big member, which made the entrance to her womb and her sloppy hold tighten around me, urging for even more semen. Read the original on https://. Coiling around my big member, it kept pushing and entangling it like countless little tongues, soaked in a mixture of semen and love juice. My meat pole was being licked by her insides. Oichi's walls earnestly begged for a man's penis, as if expecting to be pumped full with even more semen. Every time my penis rubbed her walls, more semen came out. Little by little the now awakened honey jar of Oichi was becoming more and more mesmerized with this pleasant feeling. At that moment, I felt it would be great if I could throw all the problems concerning the country's internal affairs to the wind and just have sex with Oichi the entire day. However, it would be unwise to do that. If I stirred up dissatisfaction between the retainers and end up being banished, I would end up walking the same path as that of Kanesada Ichiju from Tosa. Oichi developing further as a woman was something I had wished for since I came to this time period. However, the more I developed her, the more I lose my mind over her body. Yeah, it seemed like this could become quite a huge problem. Once the ejaculation was over, my penis shrunk. I moved Oichi, who was still lying on top of me, beside me, placing her head on my arm. On top of the futon, my semen was forming a huge puddle as it poured out of her tired crotch. Seeing this once again fulfilled my lust for conquest. The real pleasure of coming inside came after the ordeal. The moment you could see the white fluid oozing out of her was the greatest. I whispered, "It felt good," to Oichi. As she was still lying on top of my arm, using it as a pillow, she made a happy-looking smile and asked for a kiss. Just when I thought she was fawning over me near my chest. The next thing I knew she was slowly breathing as if in a deep sleep. Looks like she was worried about me. Stealing herself this entire time must have exhausted her. While patting Oichi's hair, I once again began thinking about the circumstances around the clash with the Rakugo clan. It might be a smart idea to write a letter to Nobunaga. Not regarding Kanemitsu Ishiwari, but about the Azai's victory against the Rakugo. In short, by sending such a letter, I would indirectly incite Nobunaga to use this momentum to mow down northern Ise since I reduced the influence of the Rakugo. Since the Rakugo clan moved differently from how it was recorded in the history of my world, there was the possibility that the Oda clan might also move differently from what I remember. 2. If by any chance the Oda clan really didn't move according to the historical facts, the threat of the Rokkaku against the Azai clan could remain within southern and thus throw the country's internal affairs into chaos. That's the one thing I want to avoid the most. Diplomacy is also necessary after all. I could not let the Oda and the Asakura fight between themselves, and there was also the need to negotiate with the Tokugawa regarding the manufacturing of cotton. Besides that, I would try to make some connections to the imperial court and use that as a trump card when I need it. Internal administration, diplomacy, and military affairs. At the very least, I would have to manage these three topics properly to achieve the aspirations that I, Nagamasa, have as the head of a well-known family. At the moment, it all seems quite overwhelming. Changing the organizational roots of the Azai clan might be necessary. On top of that, I have to look for the right person for the right job, seeking someone that specializes in a certain subject. If I don't do that, I wouldn't be able to obtain the glorious Omi that I am hoping for. I really didn't want to admit it, but if I don't borrow everyone's strength, I wouldn't be able to develop this region. While embracing Oichi and feeling her warmth, I slowly fell into a deep slumber. I omitted a line in this paragraph since it did not make any sense. I will have to check history again to see if the Rokkaku had anything to do with the northern of ISE. Chapter 14. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 14. A Keepsake, edited by Crimson Wolf 8439. Part 1. In the middle of the night, the faint light of the lamps illuminating our room began to dim, as if they were about to fade at any moment. From an illuminated window came a gust of wind that blew across my face, waking me up. As I moved my head and opened my eyes sluggishly, my view was immediately filled with a woman who lay beside me, using my arm as a pillow. She softly puffed as she slept. She looked so peaceful. Due to our earlier intercourse, we ended up sweating quite a lot, and her bangs were stuck to her forehead. But if they were ignored, there would be nothing out of the ordinary. You wouldn't think that the sleeping woman in front of me had been gasping, struggling and climaxing on top of my chest a few hours ago. I was able to hold this woman once again. She had been forced to follow so many crazy sexual demands from me, and yet she bravely faced them, timidly clinging on to me and finally, even shaking her own hips to reach climax. My beloved woman had done all this in such a short amount of time. Even I thought that we had been going at it a bit too roughly, but there was no helping it. After all, Oichi's period had arrived, which forced us to halt our nightly activities for a while. While she was on her period, I had to keep telling myself not to make a move on Oichi. However, when I couldn't plunge my penis into her soft and plump insides, as a man, I couldn't settle down. Now that I knew the warmth of that honey jar, it seemed like I had become completely charmed by it. In the past few days, Oichi had been drawing out my semen with her soft and flexible fingers. She could sate my physical but not my mental frustration. That being said, it was already the 5th day. Oichi's woman days were over, which made me lose myself to my sexual urges. I ended up violating her honey jar. It might have been inevitable. However, she embraced my barbarity and accepted me while holding me with great affection. No matter how you look at it, she is truly a goddess. I thought to myself as I fiddled with her glossy hair, taking care not to wake her up. Read the original on https://dow.is. The warm flesh on her chest. Touching it with the tip of my fingers, I slowly continued pressing into them, but it seemed like no matter how much I pressed into them, they would never lose their elasticity. They were just like those soft rubber balls used by elementary students to play catch ball. It was the type of high-quality skin that you would want to keep touching forever. As sudden as it was, she became my wife while I wasn't clear on what I was doing here. Shortly after, I robbed her of her virginity, and now I could no longer get tired of messing with and touching her beautiful body over and over. While caressing Oichi's white skin, there were times I was under the illusion that my hands were merging into her beautiful skin. I could clearly feel the flow of blood under her skin. Using my fingers, I could feel that my heart was slowly adapting to her pulsing. I gradually got lost in the sensation. My hand lay on top of her exposed breast. I had already removed the clothes covering her chest earlier. I felt her chest going up and down in rhythm with her sleeping breaths through the softest part of her body. It was still covered with some sweat left by our earlier intercourse, making it a little moist. With the fingertips of my right hand, I groped Oichi's nipple. They had already completely softened up again, as if the stiffened state of just a few hours ago had never occurred. Slowly and softly playing with her nipple, I threw a kiss onto Oichi's cheek. Doing so made her entire face flush red. And with that, I knew that my dear wife had been pretending to be asleep for a while now. Oichi. You were awake. No, I woke you up, didn't I? Forgive me. It's all right. Oichi brought her face closer to my chest and whispered while searching for the most comfortable position. Because when I'm embraced or touched by Nagamasa-sama. Every time you touch me, Oichi is filled with happiness. Is that so? Read the original on https://dao.ist. I have noticed recently that I may have become a little spoiled. I had the feeling that she had known that for quite a while. However, being the gentleman that I was, I wouldn't mention that fact. I continued rubbing Oichi's silk-like hips slowly. Nagamasa-sama, what is it? While we are talking about how spoiled I am, is it alright if I ask you a question? Alright. Why won't the fighting stop? Why won't the war end? I don't know. If a method that could settle all wars and disputes at their roots were to be found, it would receive the greatest price of all, world peace. However, the method would instantly lose its value, since from then on, there would only be peace till all life came to an end. But I can make it end. Make it end. Humfofu. Laughing SFX, what's wrong, did I say something funny? No, it's just that brother also said the same thing. Read the original on https://dao.ist. Nobunaga.dono did, yes. As she continued to cuddle against my chest, Oichi said. It is Big Brother's favorite phrase. That he would end the wars in this world and make it a peaceful place. That even if he had to make the whole world his enemy, he would accomplish it. I see. I placed my hand on Oichi's cheek, gently brushing away her hair and exposing her ear as I enjoyed the view of that perfectly formed face. Anyu-sama and Nagamasa-sama. Could be alike. Anyu-sama equals older brother-sama, that's not true. While embracing Oichi, I whispered. I'm no more than a single, humble human. Having the entire world turned into enemies, I couldn't do something like that. Nagamasa-sama. But, I will protect you. I'll protect you no matter what. When the time comes. Even if you were to make an enemy out of everyone. Yeah. As I dropped a kiss on her face, I said. No matter what happens, I'll protect you. Chapter 14.2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 14. A Keepsake Part 2 edited by Crimson Wolf. The Odani Castle north of Omi held by the Azai clan and the Kasagayama Castle in Ekigo held by the man regarded as a war god, Kenshin Yusuji. Together with the Gasentoda Castle in Izumo, which was held by the man feared as the visionary strategist, they made up 3 of the 5 great mountain castles of Japan. There was a time when Hisamasa and Nagamasa intended to continuously expand using the steep Odani mountains to develop mountain castles similar to those. Once a month, all the vassals of the Azai clan would gather in the mountain castle. In other words, that which you would call a council. During this council, the head of the Azai clan, Nagamasa Azai, would visit them and discuss the situation of the Azai clan and the direction it would take in the future. Iroku era, 10th year, 1567, February 5th, morning. As I entered the great hall of Odani Castle, all the vassals immediately lined up and lowered their heads. Speaking of the vassals, the ones sitting closer to the seat of honor were vassals that had a much higher rank than those sitting at the corners or near the end of the room. In this unusual situation which I would probably never get used to, I sat on the seat of honor and told the vassals to lift their heads. It was only after I said this that the one in charge of the council, Tsukechika Azai, raised his head and started the council by declaring, "Well then, we will begin the council now. To start off, we will have a report of income and expenditure from Masamoto. Dano. You have the floor." Yes. The second eldest of the 5 Azai siblings, Masamoto, bowed towards me and presented me with a scroll. Upon opening the scroll, a neatly written financial report of the Azai clan was presented to me. Scroll: due to the recent invasion of the Rokaku clan, I thought that the income would decrease temporarily. However, due to my older brother's great effort, you will find that the opposite is true, and I can safely say that the territory of the Azai is safe. The amount of people passing through Lake Biwa has increased, and the revenue from taxes has increased as well. The money paid to the government coming from the seat hasn't changed much from before either. Just to note, the seat, as he called it, was simply the authority related to the trade association. The seat was a way for the daimyo and the temples to collect payments through their great influence, controlling the economic activity and monopolizing both trade and sales. In short, if there was a seat, the merchants from other lands' castles couldn't here to do business. Also, due to the invasion of the Rokaku clan, Sawayama Castle received some damages that will result in additional expenditures for its restoration, so I shall confirm them now. Read the original on https://dao.ist. Masamoto continued as he begun to provide an explanation, but truth be told, for someone like me who didn't understand much about this age's currency, it was quite a complicated speech. However, according to Masamoto's report, the income and expenditures of the Azai clan this past month returned positive numbers. Great job, Masamoto. I don't have anything particular to add. Understood. I bade Masamoto to retire and fixed my posture. Taking that as a signal, Tsukechika opened his mouth wide so that his words would echo throughout the great hall. From here on, Nagamasa-sama will instruct us on the plans for the Azai clan. Everyone take heed and listen well. The men in the great hall prostrated themselves all at once. The chief vassals of the Azai clan, Kayatsuna Akeo, Tsunachika Kaiho, Kayasada Amanamori, Naotsun Endo and Kazumasa Isono, rubbed their faces with force against the tatami and ended up with completely arched backs. Good. Lift your heads, you lot. Having said that, the men in the great hall slowly raised their heads. The view of the 100 vassals that filled the great hall moving in unison was, visually speaking, something quite amazing. Together with these men, I will brave these turbulent times and make Omi prosperous. A heavy sense of responsibility weighted down on both of my shoulders, but that was what it meant to be a daimyo. To bear and take responsibility was my job. When I thought about it that way, this level of pressure was not something that would make my knees buckle. You men had discussed your goals for governing the country before, right? From here on, I will indicate a concrete plan. I directed my speech at the silent great hall. Read the original on https://dao.ist. First of all, for the Azai to prosper, we require money. We must guarantee this first. However, in order to realize this, we will also need to increase the number of people in our territory. Therefore, what we have to do is attract a great number of people into our domain. A large portion of the talented people in the Azai clan were military officers, rather than civil officers. Because this country was often at war, it was something that couldn't be helped. There were many people who had sharp minds when it came to warfare but were unable to wrap their heads around government affairs. It wasn't something that needed to be simplified to the level of a syllogism too, but there was still a need to keep the explanation simple. This was the point I was paying the most attention to. To persuade my vassals, I had to explain it in a way they understood, since I needed their consent. You may ask me, what is needed to increase our population? Simply put, all we have to do is to show that the lands of the Azai are the best in the country. And Puhu ran around the great hall. If the population of the castle town increases, then so shall our money. If more people come to our farm villages, then our rice production shall increase too. We must increase the size of our population within the Azai domain. The basis for our rich and strong country plan relies on this. The vassals started nodding their heads, saying, I see, I see. They were slow on the uptake, but once they understood, they were quite fast. If you were to ask why, it was because people living in this age paid the most attention to the people closest to them. The military generals of this age generally lived in farming villages rather than the castle towns. Those who did live in the castle towns only started to live there after the separation between farmers and samurai begun. Put simply, people were generally categorized into those who could fight and everyone else. But until that separation had begun, it was a common occurrence to see a samurai take their tools and tend to their lands. To show that the Azai territory is the best in the country, a different industry that doesn't exist in other countries is needed. You lot, take a look at your clothes. As I said this, the men all immediately begun inspecting their clothes. The way they obeyed so earnestly was very endearing. The clothes you are wearing are most likely made out of hemp. The clothes worn by Kayatsuna and the others are probably made out of cotton. In 10 years from now, I'll change those clothes of yours into ones made of silk. The great hall burst into a clamor. It was a natural response. Even if it was something that bloomed due to the import from China's border during the Civil War age, the ones who could obtain one of these were mostly daimyos and vassals who held a high rank. For now, it was considered a high-class item. For that, the establishment of a workplace for sericulture and spinning must be made. Right now, the sericultural industry is being carried out by the daughters of farming families scattered here and there, but this is something that we ourselves must carry out intensely. We must raise silkworms, exploit their yarn and weave it at this new workplace. Then the Azai's silk will spread as far as the country. If we do this, a great number of people will be attracted to the riches. Just like moths drawn to a flame. By the way, silkworms and moths are from the same species, but it seems the vassals didn't notice my well-thought-out joke. However, the men eagerly started touching their own clothes and daydreaming things like, if I were able to wear clothes of silk. There were also men whispering things like, forget about me, if I could get my wife and daughter to wear one. I'm so proud, you guys are the best fathers of the Sengoku era. Read the original on https://dao.ist. If we have the silk, the Azai domain in Omi will be constantly developed. At the same time, I intend to outfit the hot springs within our territories with facilities. The Great Hall shook with words like, hot spring facilities. Spa. In Omi, there are many hot springs, but many of them are not yet outfitted. In order to raise money for that, I'm thinking about building an industry. Of course, you guys will also be able to use them. As I said this, the men's eyes became completely round and a happy expression appeared on their faces. What the heck, it was cute. In this age, to scrub the dirt and mud from one's body, the fundamental norm was to pass one's body under a cold river stream. Being able to exchange that for warm or hot water. It was something that would not only affect the citizens greatly, but the samurai as well. We'll build a house and outfit it as a hot spring facility. We'll also establish a lodging house for the use of guests. Then, the cost of construction will be taken from our funds, but I'm also planning on collecting a bunch of donations. Those who contributed with donations will be able to enter the baths without paying the fee, and on top of that, their names will be engraved on the house's wall together with mine so that they may remain for posterity. The men let out an "tuhu" in a joyful tone. The charm of the baths and the desire to have their names engraved along with the family head's name appealed to their hearts a lot. It seemed like the vassals were taking this as a reward from me for their bravery at stopping the ambition of the Rokkaku with just a small force at Sawayama Castle. It was completely normal for anyone in any age to want to leave behind their name and heroics so that they would be remembered by future generations. The management of the established hot spring facilities in Omi will be completely under the Azai clan. It's very likely that many people outside the capital will try to interfere with it. The bath entrance fee and related incomes will be used as our funds and will be used exclusively to further the development of Omi. I see, said the vassals, looking satisfied. Once the hot spring facilities were established, a great number of people would be attracted to it. Then preparation of the lodging facilities would be necessary as well. After that, we would have a problem with food, but we could resolve that by buying it from the farmers. We would be able to buy the edible plants they gathered and give them compensation for it. This way, the income of the farmers would also increase, helping them in their daily lives. On top of that, if a hot spring facility was constructed near them, they would be able to take a breather from their hard work. It looked like the vassals were able to comprehend my aim. Naturally, these two suggestions are nothing more than a part of my intentions. However, it is a plan necessary for the prosperity of Omi. If everyone agrees to it, we shall hold the ceremony right now. Are there any objections? Sukechika faced the great hall and asked, but I was fairly certain there would not be any objections, especially since it concerned their livelihood. It didn't matter who they were. People were always pleading, won't this life get better? And even though they kept complaining about their lives, they also believed that, I can't do anything on my own. However, this time, the most influential person in Omi, Nagamasa Azai, was suggesting, why don't we make the life of our vassals better? There was no reason for them to oppose. However, the real problem starts now. As I watched the childlike smiles on the vassals in the great hall, I clenched my fist tightly as a strange tension filled me. Editor note. Basically, steep mountains equals good defenses equals good place for castle. The syllogism here being, many are military officers. Almost none are civil officers. So they have trouble understanding government affairs. Sericulture, or silk farming, is the cultivation of silkworms to produce silk. Chapter 14.3 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Edited by Crimson Wolf. After the council, I took the satisfied Taishiketsukage from its reverse harem of black horses and ran through the mountain path without any retainers following me. Each time I glanced at Taishiketsukage, I thought about the person I was about to meet, and my heart throbbed a little. Continuing through the calm rural areas, I arrived at the area that Kayatsuna had investigated for me. Even though I hadn't pulled on the reins, Taishiketsukage came to a halt, almost as if she could read my mind. It was an old farming family, a house located in a town at the foot of Nana Aoyama, southeast of Odani Castle. Mud walls with cracks where the sun could shine through and a roof made of wooden boards only held down by stone weights. It was a gloomy residence and the smell of the damp earth filled the air. Compared to some of the other houses, it wasn't that awful, but it was also difficult to call it adequate. This is Hikobi's house. I remembered the face of the man who looked after Taishiketsukage in Odani Castle, the man who received capital punishment from Hisamasa after offering me Ishiwari Kanemitsu. At the moment, Hisamasa was greatly agitated in Odani Castle. It was because the treasured sword, passed down through the Azai clan, had been taken by the man taking care of father's precious horse and was still missing. Father here refers to Sukamasa, Hisama's father and the original rider of Taishiketsukage. Even if it was a retired man. To take the private property of the previous family head, and on top of that, the Azai clan's heirloom, and lose it, made Hikobi's sins quite severe. Hisamasa, not being satisfied with giving him capital punishment, was rumored to be thinking about exterminating his entire clan as well. And so, the leader of the Azai clan's vassals, Kayatsuna Akeo, was ordered by Hisamasa to investigate Hikobi's direct relatives. However, Kayatsuna was delaying his investigation on purpose, passing all the information he managed to obtain to me first. Rather than letting the now retired Hisamasa-sama know, I believe it was better to inform the current head of the clan, Nagamasa. Kayatsuna probably guessed the facts about Hikobi's deed. Or maybe Natsunyuho saw me pulling Ishiwari Kanemitsu out at Sawayama Castle, knew about Hisamasa's instructions and whispered the details to Kayatsuna silently. However, regardless of what had happened, thanks to Kayatsuna, I was able to visit Hikobi's residence before Hisamasa's direct subordinates came. "Excuse me, is anybody home?" When I raised my voice towards the humble house. Samurai. The one who appeared while lowering her head was a girl around 9 years old. Her nutrition must have been bad as well. Her body was slim, so delicate that it seemed it would break if one were to grasp it too strongly. Her skin was quite tanned by the sun, so I guessed that she must have worked outside in the sun a lot. "You are." Having only said that, I was troubled as to how to continue this conversation. "Hikobi only has one little sister." I recalled Kayatsuna's words inside my head. This girl is probably the little sister of the man who died for my sake. Read the original on https://dao.ist. When I remembered that, my pulse intensified and I became unable to figure out what to say next. Putting my hand on my forehead as I looked up to the sky, I was unable to face her directly. As I did that, Taishikitsukage gave me a small poke with her nose. Turning back, I found those light green pupils filled with a strong will, staring at me and my behavior intently. That was right, there was no longer anyone else for this girl. It was like Taishikitsukage was telling me to do things properly. That was the feeling I got. I braced myself and started walking through unkempt path towards her. In response, she ran inside the house, her back still slightly bent at the waist. It was a natural response. In this age, it was an everyday occurrence for a woman to be raped by a man. Not only that, I had close to no connection to her at all. It was obvious for her to be on guard. Hikobi has received capital punishment. I said it loud enough so she could hear it inside the house where she had run to. Your big brother is no longer in this world. Her face appeared timidly from a crack in the house. After examining my face fixedly, she became pale and started trembling. I want to speak to you. Without anyone listening to us. She gave a small nod as her body continued to tremble. I entered the gloomy and humid house, while she stood still in one of the room's corners. When I beckoned her, after hesitating a little, she sat down on the ground, keeping an adequate distance from me. I want to ask you a few questions. Okay. Yes. After watching her nod deeply, I went on. Hikobi, who was taking care of the horses at Odani Castle, is your brother, correct? She once again nodded deeply. What about your parents? Are you alone in this house? The girl nodded. Read the original on https://dao.ist. No, that can't be. There is no way you can be living on your own. The village head has been holding on to Big Brother's property and has been looking after me. I see. Well, it wasn't unreasonable for the eldest son, who had gone to lend his services at the castle, to ask the most influential person in the village to look after their future affairs. That being said, this house's environment didn't seem that bad, but... Samurai-sama. What's wrong? Has Big Brother died? That's right. Her face distorted and she began crying where she stood. In the modest and narrow space, the girl's cries echoed. I rushed to her and softly embraced her thin body. I intended to stay that way until the girl stopped crying. Are you okay now? Yes. While sipping her nose, the girl nodded deeply. Has Samurai Sama come to tell me about Big Brother? That is one of the reasons. I struggled for a while with what to say to her, however, saying nothing wouldn't settle anything, so I spoke to the girl. Your big brother Hikobi, for the sake of another man, did something that required him to prepare himself for death. That man feels deeply indebted to Hikobi. However, What Hikobi did is something that the world finds unforgivable. It's a sin that not only Hikobi, but his whole family has to carry. That includes me. That's right. At this rate, you will be hanged. Read the original on https://dao.ist/enma.sama as well. 1. Yes. I asked the girl a question as I made her stand up. Do you want to die? The girl shook her head wildly. If that's the case, come with me. Is that okay? Well, only if you are not against it. The girl squeezed the cuff of my kimono hard. Is Samurai.san an acquaintance of Big Brother? Well, yes, but... Then it's okay. The girl looked firmly into my eyes. If so, then it's alright. Exiting the ruined house with the girl, Taishikatsuki, who was waiting to go home, let out a cry. I climbed onto Taishikatsuki and extended my hand to the girl. I was finally able to clearly see the girl's features. Her face was pure, not much older than 10 years old. It was one of those cute girls that one could find from time to time on summer vacation, when going back to one's hometown. That was the feeling she gave. What's your name? Hisa. Hisa. I see. Shall we go then? I took the little sister of the man who literally threw his life away for my sake, on my lap and ran back at full speed on my way back to Odani Castle. This was the only thing I could do for Hikobi, who was no longer a part of this world. Incidentally, I had already thought about how to deal with the girl. Whether they accept or not is a different problem. It probably wouldn't turn into anything terrible. I had not prepared a meeting, but I was determined to make it work somehow. No, I had to make it work. I went to the town at Odani Castle and bought a pretty kimono for children. After I made her wear it, I passed through the castle gates. While basking in the curious gazes of the vassals, I pulled the girl's hand and knocked on the door of the room of the person I was looking for. Not really clear on who this is, probably the village chief that took care of her. Chapter 15.1 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Edited by Crimson Wolf. And my 8th grader syndrome was at its worst. I became convinced that the Japanese islands were a somewhat inconvenient place for a great number of people to inhabit after looking at the maps of Japan. To begin with, there were too many mountainous regions. Of course, mountains were filled with many important things for humans, such as fruits and water springs. However, it was not ideal for a large number of people to inhabit. If you wished for a large number of people to live somewhere, you needed to have flat ground. In Japan's case, there wasn't enough of it. For the Sengoku era, strengthening the national power was considered the most important point, and making as much ground as you could into part of your domain was the trend. As for Omi, even though Lake Biwa took a large amount of living space away, it was still a great region for people to live in. That being said, the Azai domains in Omi were in fact divided into two parts, the east and the west. One area centered around Odani Castle and the other, on the west side of Lake Biwa, centered around Shimazuyama Castle. The western side of the Azai domains possessed spacious plains formed by both the Edo and Kamo rivers. On top of that, the Edo River, which was connected to Lake Biwa, was not only used as a means for transportation but also as a relay point from Kyoto to Odani Castle. In short, both the east and the west of the Azai domains had their own core regions, and I had to try to balance the development for both. In order to achieve that, I had to gather a great number of bureaucrats under me. However, that alone was a giant hurdle to overcome, since there were only a few capable administrative officers in the domain of the Azai. Fortunately, we had Yujitane and Yuji on the western side of the domain, who had succeeded in setting up a marriage alliance between the Azai and the Oda, but I couldn't rely on him alone. Azai's development would forever remain a pipe dream if we couldn't find and nurture more talented men. Standing before me was the most talented bureaucrat of the eastern Azai domains, Masamoto Azai, who had his arms folded, groaning as he faced me. Elder brother truly has mentioned something I have never thought of. After he spoke, Masamoto groaned again. Hisa was completely cowering with fear beside me, so it was easily imaginable how tough Masamoto's expression was. Furrowing his brows and leaning his chin heavily on a clenched fist, he groaned in earnest. So in short. Read the original on https://. Counting with his fingers, Masamoto scowled intently at Hisa and me as he questioned. Elder brother wishes to teach this girl arithmetics and make her an Azai retainer. That is correct. Ah. Ha. As expected, this went beyond his understanding. In this era, it was quite common to raise a girl to a certain age, then marry her off. Even if they were put to work in the castle, they would at most do small chores such as sewing or laundry and didn't have any chance of ever being involved in anything else. That's the type of society and era we lived in. However, what I wished for was for Hisa to become a woman who can use arithmetic. In other words, I wanted to impart the skills that had been monopolized by men for so long to this girl. But in the Sengoku era, no one could comprehend this crazy request of mine. Even Nobunaga Oda lamented that, if Oichi had been born as a male, she would have become a great general. Even he, who had an innovative and flexible mind, wasn't able to embrace the idea of teaching women special skills and putting them to practical use. Since I was the older brother, Masamoto respected my words, but even so, he had a hard time agreeing to my request. Elder brother, what do you hope to accomplish by teaching this girl arithmetic? As expected, even Masamoto had a look of, if you don't tell me your true intentions, it will be hard to comply. On his face. It couldn't be helped. As I spoke to him, I made sure not to tell any lies but avoided the truth too. Masamoto. This girl was able to touch Taishiketsukichi. Read the original on https://dao.ist. What the? Is that true? Masamoto was surprised once more after hearing that. It was truly a statement that only the people of Azai would understand. As you know, Taishiketsukichi allowed only Hikobi and me to touch her. But now there is this girl. It might be too early to tell, but it seems like Taishiketsukichi has taken a liking to her. She also has no next of kin, so I took her without thinking it through. That is. I see. I understand. Masamoto fixated his gaze on Hisa as if trying to find a clue. That Taishiketsukichi had become the leader of all the other horses and a queen with a reverse harem. Had long been spread among all the retainers of the Azai clan. At the same time, finding someone to take care of the horses had started being an issue as well. Since all the other horses were sticking close to Taishiketsukichi, the caretakers were forced to get close to Taishiketsukichi as well when trying to groom the horses. And obviously, she disliked them getting close to her. This, in turn, riled up the horses surrounding her, showing their caretakers a killing intent like a bunch of street thugs saying, "Hey you, are you molesting my girl, huh?" This was, of course, the most frightening situation for the caretakers. Therefore, we were forced to let the horses roam free on the pastures outside the Odani castle walls. In order for the horse caretakers to move safely, they had to bait the horses with food. In other words, since Hisamasa had delivered capital punishment to Hikobi, the management of the Azai horses had been approaching a perilous situation. Furthermore, after the end of the battle with the Rakaku, the Azai clan's number of horses had increased by a lot, mostly through the efforts of Taishiketsukichi. We feared that if another battle broke out and the number of horses increased again, it would drastically affect the Azai supplies. With everyone in the Azai clan racking their brains over how to solve this problem, my words of Hisa was able to touch Taishiketsukichi resounded deeply with Masamoto. Elder brother, you are absolutely sure she is able to touch Taishiketsukichi, right? Read the original on https://dao.ist. That is correct. That is why I brought her with me. I see, I now completely understand elder brother's plans. Quick-witted Masamoto clapped his knees while nodding his agreement. Your plan is to not only have this girl take care of Taishiketsukage and the rest of the horses but eventually, you wish to leave the supervision of the feeding and the maintenance of the facilities to her as well. Correct. Up till now the management of the horses and their facilities has been a complete mess, and this has caused unnecessary expenses. However, if someone would be able to take on the role of supervisor, our costs will decrease by a lot. Yeah, if I was being honest, I didn't understand a single thing he said. It seemed Matsumoto was overthinking the entire thing and started thinking of possibilities I hadn't even thought of. Oh well, this solved many of our future problems. I threw a fleeting look in Hisa's direction, and it looked like she was confused. Her future was being planned out without her having any say in it. However, it was to ensure her safety as well, so I sought her forgiveness in my mind. Not even Hisamasa would have been able to guess that under the current circumstances, Hikobi's relative was being kept here at Odani Castle. When trying to hide something, the best place is right under their nose. When something is close to oneself, humans tend not to notice it. However, elder brother, there is one issue. What is it? This person's Hisa's birthplace. Right, society was about hierarchy in the Sengoku era. As widespread as the many uprisings could be called, this idea that Japanese society had invented for itself, ultimately still held much sway over people's thoughts. The best example would be the ranks handed to officials of the imperial court. The ones who had overthrown their superiors had all done so by earning these ranks. That was certainly to declare their rebellions as legitimate to both those in and out of the court, but what it signified at the end of the day, was that these calculated ploys could not be made outside of the existing bounds of society. Regardless of the era, for people living in Japan, heritage was crucial to how the worth of a person was measured. Had Hisa been a farmer's daughter, she would be regarded as the likes of a farmer upon climbing upwards, but had she been the daughter of the emperor's chief advisor, she would be held as embodying the very idea of refinement. Elder brother has picked her up, but as one would expect, in her current state I find it hard to employ her. Let us find an appropriate family to accept her as an adoptive daughter. After saying that, Matsumoto flashed a smile towards me for the first time. Chapter 15.2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Blue Bamboo Editor. Sora E/N. This part got delayed a little bit due to some unfortunate circumstances. Chapter 15 is divided into 3 parts, so expect next part by next week. After Matsumoto took his leave, I proceeded to enter my room with Hisa. Thereupon, I asked my retainer to summon Naotsun Endo. While I was waiting for Endo Dano to arrive, I decided to partake of some rice crackers. Naturally, I asked Hisa to have some as well. However, the little girl didn't respond at all. Her stiff face betrayed the tense emotions that she was feeling at that moment. Her reaction was quite understandable. In this period, if one were a humble samurai who had only seen the feudal lord from a distance, if they were to have a private audience with the almighty feudal lord, then naturally they would be uncomfortable. After all, many feudal lords in this period were like Hisamasa, who would take affront for the slightest of perceived transgressions and would end up meting out a terrible punishment for the said crimes. I, however, was different. I believed that it was my duty as a feudal lord to take care of my subjects, especially those who had shown great loyalty. Hikobi had chosen to lay down his life for me. If I, his liege, couldn't take care of his only surviving relative, what sort of a liege was I? In fact, I would have to ask myself what sort of a person was I. To me, who hailed from a different period, emotions like justice, guilt and humanity have been engraved deep within, and thus I could not ignore the plight of this little girl as many of my fellow feudal lords would have done. My soliloquy, however, was interrupted at this moment by a voice originating from the corridor saying, Naotsun Endo has arrived. Let him in. Dnov Om. The man who entered prostrated in front of me for a while as I observed him. I permitted him to get up while I revised the historical facts that I knew about him. Naotsun Endo was above all, a man who was loyal to the core. Historically, regardless of what happened, he was a subordinate who continued to follow Nagamasa to the very end. If his ploy had succeeded in the Battle of Onagawa, history may have been different. TL. Naotsun had camouflaged his regiment as being the soldiers of the enemy in order to delude the enemy, but his stratagem failed and he was killed by the enemy commander Nobunaga. He was always trying to support me, both in the interview with Hisamasa and in the battle with the Rakuku. Now, whenever I think of whom should I consult first in the Azai clan, the answer that invariably comes to my mind is Naotsun Endo. While I was thinking that, Naotsun, who had been observing Hisa, carefully said in a low voice, "My lord, as per the orders of the previous clan head, for the crime of stealing the family heirloom without permission, all members of the family of the criminal Hikobi have to be executed without fail." Somehow it seemed that Naotsun had figured out Hisa's identity. Hisa, who heard his words, was visibly shaken. Her face, which turned pale, darted from my face to his as she did her best to gauge our intentions. A natural reaction for a girl of her age who hears that orders have been sent for her execution. A smile slowly spread across my face. I turned my face towards Hisa and said smilingly, "If you get upset by such little situations, how would you do in the future where you would have to face much worse?" Seeing the confident gleam in my eyes, she seemed to have been reassured of her safety. I could quite clearly hear the sigh of relief that she let out. I then proceed to address Naotsun with a dignified expression. "Naotsun Dano, are you aware that this girl is the younger sister of Hikobi?" Yes, although this is the first time that we have met face to face, I was convinced that Hikobi would bring his sister to Odani Castle. Saying these words, Naotsun approached closer and whispered in my ears. After all, I was aware that Hikobi had secretly taken away the Ishiwari Kanemitsu to the battlefield for you to use, my lord. Naotsun said, "Hikobi was a true follower of yours, sire. Someone who is as loyal as him is very rarely found. Therefore, I am very dissatisfied with the punishment meted out to him by Lord Hisamasa." His face turned burning red. I could clearly see the seething rage deep within. If I had been there at the right time, I would have asked him to stop. But, he trailed off disconsolately. It seems that Hisa had finally understood something. The actual reason for her brother's death and why she had been brought here by me. Even as she came to realize the truth, a rain of tears slowly spilled from her eyes and wetted her cheeks. "Remember, that you are Hikobi's little sister, and no matter what happens and no matter what people say, be proud of your older brother and always remember him within your heart. Know that, being his sister, his blood flows among your veins as well, and for that, you can be proud." Naotsun said so as he gently tapped the little girl's thin shoulder. Hisa had been crying for a while now, but thanks to Naotsun, who consoled her repeatedly in a low voice, she managed to gain some control of herself and stopped crying. Naotsun, it seemed, was very good at dealing with children. "And then, my lord, sending for this humble one is in regards to this little one." "You are right." I nodded in response and then looked towards Hisa. She met my gaze with a serious stare of her own. "I want to welcome this girl into the Azai clan." "What?" Naotsun failed to hide his surprise at my announcement. "Well, listen to me first. Like her brother Hikobi, Hisa is able to approach Taishiketsukage safely as well. Thus, I want her to inherit Hikobi's will and take care of the horses as he once did. I have already talked with Masamoto about this and he approves of my decision as long as Hisa is adopted by a person with the appropriate social standing. So, I thought of consulting you about who is right to adopt this girl." When I said these words, Hisa looked up slowly and a sharp gleam radiated from her eyes. "Clan head, but isn't this problem easy to resolve?" "How so?" "It's simple. I will accept this little girl as my adopted daughter." He let out a smile as he said these words. It was an attractive smile, dependable and manly. In the current Azai clan, I'm probably the one most aware of the series of incidents that have taken place this time. Being aware of Hikobi's true intentions, I have no pressure in taking care of his little sister and thus can take care of her better than anybody else. "Ah, I see. And like her, I too am alone here in the Odani castle. After all, my wife and son are not here with me, thus her presence would help stave off some of my loneliness. Most importantly, for a long time now I wanted to have a daughter. I have got too tired of raising that good-for-nothing brat of mine. When he said words like that, I had no choice but to bow down in defeat to Naotsun. Meanwhile, Hisa, who heard our conversation, looks at us both with swollen eyes that are brimming with tears again. Somehow I was sure that they weren't tears of grief. Naotsun would take Hisa to his residence in the Odani castle and she would start to learn arithmetic and the ways of dealing with the horses starting from the day after tomorrow. Apart from these two skill sets, he would also be teaching her some other skills that can prove to be highly useful in this time and age. This is fine for now. All that is left is to wait until the day that Hisa can stand on her own 2 feet as a fine adult. Looking at the steadily receding back of Hisa as she left with Naotsun, I muttered to myself, "Hikobi, don't you worry, I will fulfill the obligation that I owe you." Chapter 15.3 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Blue Bamboo Editor. Sora time seemed to pass swiftly, for soon twilight had set in. Once I was done with my meal, my feet, which seemed to possess a will of their own, headed towards Oichiheim's room. In front of her room stood one of her maids, Tsubaki, who upon seeing her master bowed deeply. Finally, it seemed that Oichiheim's maids have started to be less wary around me, and they even have smiles on their faces sometimes too. I'm quite pleased to see this. After all, a world where everyone is smiling and without conflict is quite a pleasing prospect, no? Are you here today as well? Tsubaki nodded with a serious expression on her face in response to my inquiry. By the way, my lord, she began to speak with a shy expression on her face, today Oichiheim is going through that time of the month. What's wrong with that? When I asked that, the maid, whose face had turned red, stared down at her feet for a moment before asking. My lord, don't you have any concubines? No, not really. I responded. Tsubaki blinked her eyes in surprise at my declaration. Oh, is that so? She then bowed before asking anxiously, my lord, was it rude of me to ask about my lord's private affairs? No, that's fine really. No need to get so worked up. Even so, please forgive this humble one. Don't worry. I waved my hand nonchalantly at the maid, who bowed deeply to apologize and then pulled the sliding doors of Oichiheim's room and entered the room. The futon had already been laid for me, and I can thus clearly understand Oichiheim's expectations for me. However, it was difficult for her to say so explicitly, being of shy nature. A woman's heart is like a summer breeze, often meandering about in uncertainty. She would think to herself that, I want that for sure, but the very next moment, she would wonder, is it right of me to want that? And so on. What a man must do in such situations is to be firm and show her exactly what she desires. Ah! Nagamasa-sama, upon recognizing me, Oichiheim bowed her head while resting on her thighs, too, as usual. I usually would start teasing her after this and move on to the night battle rapidly. However, tonight was destined to be different. Oichiheim proceeded to take a letter out from her desk and handed it over to me. I opened the letter nervously. The letters of the Warring States period are different from those used in modern times. Firstly, what is used is mostly kanji. Secondly, the kanji of this time is vastly different from what is used in the modern age. The characters of this era are called kuzu-shurji. When my 8th grade disease was at its peak, I had memorized the contents of a kuzu-shurji dictionary in its entirety, thus I could somehow manage to understand the characters that were written in the letter. A brief summary of the letter was as follows. To the guardian of the Azai territories, we hope that thou are doing well. Well, the other day we got a letter from our dearest sister. We were afraid that our dearest sister was being harassed at her in-laws, but it seems that thou art taking good care of her. As an older brother, we are most relieved. It appears that thou, the guardian of the Azai territories, wishes to exchange a fluorite weapon from our collection. Thou art most free to do so. By the way, we would like to hear of our dearest sister's affairs from thee in person. It shall not take long for us to capture Mino in its entirety, thus we can meet soon after. As I clan head, thou might head to Mino, or we shall head towards Omi, as per whichever is convenient for thee. We are looking forward to meeting you soon. Till then, take care. P.S. Do not forget to take proper care of our dearest sister. Yours sincerely, Nobunaga, the Lord of the Odas. By the way, Nobunaga's letters were polite to everyone. And naturally, he was a man who inserted interesting anecdotes, valuable proverbs, and even terrible threats into his letter. The letter sent to me was ostensibly quite polite. However, there was a subtle text running throughout, especially in the parts dealing with Oichihime. There is an attitude of, if you do anything to her, you would have to face my wrath in its entirety. Historically, it is a famous fact that Nobuyasu, the eldest son of Ieyasu Tokugawa, was forced to commit seppuku thanks to Nobunaga. The story runs like this: his mother didn't get along well with her daughter-in-law, Tokuhime, who was the daughter of Nobunaga. Out of frustration, Tokuhime wrote to her father about how her mother-in-law meddled in her affairs, leading to Nobunaga confronting Ieyasu about it. Ieyasu, who didn't wish to antagonize Nobunaga, executed his wife and ordered his son to commit seppuku. In other words, if I dared to have a dispute with Oichihime, I would be facing the full wrath of Nobunaga, an extremely scary prospect. What did respected elder brother have to say in his letter to Nagamasa-sama? Get along with Oichihime. Otherwise. My elder brother seems to be a bit worried about me. Oichihime giggled while saying so. And did elder brother have something to say about the fluorite weapon? Oh, it seems that he is willing to exchange one. Thanks a lot. Oichihime had asked Nobunaga directly through a letter to exchange Ishiwari Kanemitsu, the ancestral heirloom of the Azai clan, and a sword that I had to hide urgently with an armor made of fluorite from Nobunaga's personal collection. I put the letter away and then proceeded to hug her tight. That's. Since I am Nagamasa-sama's wife, I am willing to do whatever is needed by Nagamasa-sama, she said softly with a shy expression on her face. On hearing my beloved wife say such a thing, I was unmistakably thrilled. The kimono that she was wearing then was a cherry blossom color, which suited her calm and gentle atmosphere very much. When I whispered my thoughts in her ear, her face turns red and she slaps me gently with a coy expression on her face. It only served to excite me further. As I gently pushed her down, the cuteness she showed earlier starts to drift away and gets replaced by the mature sex appeal of an adult. I took the hand of Oichihime, which was still shying away from me, and then gently placed it on my chest. Oichihime's hair fluttered softly, and that slender, big-breasted body slipped into my arms, melting against my body as it did so. A lovely fragrance drifted from her form as I laid my face against her nape, the scent wafted into my nose and then through it into the entirety of my being. Bvec, my blood surged and a certain lower part began to rise towards the heavens. Oichi, I muttered softly, my voice but a gentle flutter like a breeze drifting across an empty plain. Yes, yes, she responded in an equally soft tone, her melodious voice resembling a gurgling brook drifting across in abandon through the mountainside. She seems to have noticed the quite prominent bump in my crotch, for she met my gaze shyly, her cheeks dyed in the same crimson hue as the setting sun. I smiled back at her and laid her down gently on the futon. Whilst pushing her down, I realized one thing. Even though I and Oichihime have been married for about a month, I had entirely forgotten about that. I'll do it tonight. While clinging to Oichihime's nape, a dark desire begins to rage within my heart like a berserk beast. Footnotes 1. TL. Nagamasa keeps calling his wife Princess Oichi. 2. TL. Dejiza. 3. TL. Chinese syllabic script used for abstraction throughout East Asia. Japanese kanji and Korean hanja are actually similar to the traditional version used in Taiwan. Mainland China uses simplified characters owing in part to the Cultural Revolution and the difficulty of mastering traditional characters. While Japan continues to use kanji especially in signboards, traffic stops etc. South Korea has mostly moved on to the indigenous Hangul script though hanja continues to be used for traditional purposes. 4. TL. Ieyasu was the future shogun of Japan who started the Tokugawa shogunate which lasted for about 200 years. He is also responsible for the development of the city of Edo, modern-day Tokyo, and the Edo period is synonymous with the Tokugawa shogunate. Chapter 16.1 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Blue Bamboo Editor. Sora E/N. While this CH was supposed to be posted all together, it is taking some time. This CH is divided into 3 parts, second part will be posted tomorrow. Draft of third part is also ready but need to make fixes. SSS updates will also start soon. Sorry for delay. In front of me lies Oichi-hime whose arms are lying at her sides powerlessly even as she looks upwards at me, her lover, with moist eyes full of emotion. I pushed her down then and there onto the futon without much ceremony. Her kimono was still wrapped around her exquisite form. She made no complaints about this rude action of mine instead, her eyes dart away from mine in shyness. Even as I tilt my head to bring my face closer to hers, her cheeks blush and she wriggles away from my grasp. Yet she is unaware that it is these little gestures of hers that stir up the passion deep within my heart. A raging fire that threatens to consume my entire being. As I slowly stroke her chin with a practiced air, she gives me an inviting glance with her beautiful eyes even as her lovely lips mumble an inaudible whisper. I understand what it means and graze my lips gently on hers. Om Oichi-hime was obsessed with kisses. During our nightly extravaganzas, she often kisses me of her own accord, and especially when the throes of passion reach their zenith she takes an initiative to use her mouth creatively. Thus, quite often what happens is that she kisses me in response to some action of me. A kiss for this. A kiss for that. Her default response for any action of mine seems to be a kiss. By the way, Oichi-hime and I have been together every night except when the Rakuku invaded. Even on those days of the month. It was 6 days from when we married when she first met that day. I still remember her apologizing profusely when I came to her room that night. A painful day that a woman receives once a month for several days. I had completely forgotten its existence. To me who was from the modern era it was no big deal, but to a woman of this age, especially a newly married bride of a feudal lord, it was a matter of life and death. That was because in this era such an event was regarded as an affliction and a woman was considered to be impure during that period. Quite often, feudal lords who were unable to be graced by their wives would march off in anger and indulge themselves with other women, and at the worst, they would punish their mate's wife severely. "Please do not leave me alone tonight," was her plaintive cry as she tried to restrain me. I simply responded by closing her mouth with mine. My decision was the key to the further progress of my great wife development plan. In the head of Oichi-hime thoughts such as, "I am impure," might be floating around. While it may be difficult to remove them altogether given the era, it was still possible to change them into, "Even though I am impure, Nagamasa-sama still cherishes me the same." Thankfully, I didn't fail in my endeavor. Since then till her menstruation lasted, she did her best to satisfy me with her soft hands, all the while saying, "I have to give my all for Nagamasa-sama." While I was unable to enjoy that sweet and blissful honey jar of hers which caused me to stress till no end, I was still altogether happy with the experience. After all, my beloved wife had gained quite a deal of experience in the skill set of comfort. "Oichi," I said softly, "I shall undress you." I whispered gently in her ear. "Yes," she murmurs in assent. I insert my fingers into the seam of the kimono and then gently trace the line of the thread as the cloth slowly unravels following the movement of my fingers. As the cloth slowly falls away, it is replaced by pure white skin of the same hue as moonlight, blooming in front of my eyes like the graceful petals of a lily slowly emerging from a bud. Shoulders that look so fragile as if they could be shattered with a touch. A clavicle, collarbone, that emphasizes the delicate frame of her body. Right below is a rising bulge like twin mountains which together with her slender body generates tremendous excitement within me. I lightly kiss her soft, red lips even as I gently grasp her clavicle. My eager tongue then moves on to her soft earlobe which melts into my mouth in response to my sucking. Framed by locks of flowing black hair, the exquisite outline of her ear is made even more apparent. I marvel at the sight once more. The ears are one of her sensitive points. Even as I gently suck on her and move my tongue still glistening with a silver thread that is an epitome of our love and desire for each other, I could see her pupils dilating in response. No doubt she was quite excited right now. My actions have no doubt reached the most primeval depths of her soul, which is exactly my purpose. Through my attempts at the development of her body, I wish to imprint deep within her being the following idea that, Nagasama-sama controls my whole being. This is why I am so devoted to developing Oichi-Heime's ears, but to her, it is nothing but a ritual through which she can dedicate herself to me. Like the sensitive ears of a dog that controls its response, Oichi-Heime's ears act as a trigger for her response as well. She begins to bring forth her thighs closer and rub them against each other in a rather erotic fashion. It is quite cute if you don't mind my saying so. I paused for a fleeting moment to take in the scene. My saliva wrapped around Oichi-Heime's ears, gently dripping onto the futon downward even as my gaze followed its path. It got to take in the appearance of my beloved wife writhing her figure rather erotically as her reason surely gave way to the desire that had emerged as a consequence of my actions. My fingers gently crawl on the slippery surface of her ears drenched with a residue of my life. Being so sensitive, she is unable to stop her body from quivering to my touch or stop those two impressive mounds on her front from surging forth like waves in a chaotic sea. Naturally, just like anyone from the modern era, I am in no way immune to such a sight. The sight of breasts dancing against each other in harmony is always a moment of supreme bliss for me. I let out an involuntary cry of joy. Oichi. Nagama.sha.ma.na.n. Her response is left incomplete due to my action of placing my mouth within hers. This time I don't have to take the initiative as she does a fabulous job by herself. Holding my cheeks with her hands, she moves her tongue all across my lips before wrapping mine in a gentle but firm grip. Recently her tongue skills have improved significantly, and now if my tongue is caught by her it is hard to break loose. Not long before, it was I who was in the offensive, and now she has usurped that role. It is quite gratifying to see the rapid rate of improvement in her skills. Recalling that lovely expression on her face as I took her for the first time, my hand latches onto her rich breasts and gives it a strong squeeze. Then reflexively, she wraps her arms around my neck and moves her face closer to mine. Yet even though the insides of my mouth are within reach, all she does is to gently tangle her tongue into my gums and slowly rub it all over. A strange sensation pierces through my entire being. An overwhelming feeling of satisfaction assaults me from all directions as I give in to the pleasure and sublimate my body, mind, and soul at the same time. Oichi-Heime has never put her tongue in my mouth. She was always reticent and only willing to go so far as to wrap her tongue within mine, and yet tonight she is licking my gums with joyous abandon. This is solid proof of the fact that my beloved has begun to acquire sexual skills. Such obscenity couldn't be thought of when one observed her prim and proper demeanor during the day. When I sucked her tongue with pleasure, she twisted and writhed her body to match my momentum so that she could continue to entangle my tongue within hers. For her, sweet words from my side were testimony to the fact that she was loved and cherished by me. Thus without fear she could slowly abandon all the remaining reason in her body and give in to the lust that raged ahead with an indomitable force. She is steadily transforming into the ideal image I had of a wife, a virtuous lady during the day, and a voluptuous whore during the night. Chapter 16.2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Translator. Blue Bamboo Editor. Sora, my hand stretches downwards in a dishonest fashion even as my tongue continues to be entangled with hers. My hand slowly moves past her kimono and down below to a region that she would never have let me feel during the day. My hand, which reaches forward and with a rapid thrust is grazing past a region of softness dripping with the fluid that is proof of her complete submission to me. My eyes gaze into hers in that moment of passion. What they observe is as different from her usual look as heaven is from hell. If her expression during the day is that of an angel, then what I am seeing now is undoubtedly that of a bewitching demoness who is delighting in her wanton indulgence. As my fingers move into her sanctum sanctorum, her expressions change further as her whole body contorts in pure pleasure. Ah! Oichi-hime made a muffled moan while overlapping her lips within mine. Meanwhile, in her lower mouth, my hand that plays in a rather lewd manner is drowned in the vast sea of fluid that comes along its way. Forced by this surge in force, it moves all around the cavern, feeling the walls vividly as it does so. She let out a scream of enjoyment. Even as both of her mouths were caressed rather expertly, I can see her face distorting in a rather lustful manner. Fa-da-da-da-da-da, my beloved wife shook her hips abruptly as my fingers penetrated through the delicate yet firm wall that stood in their way. This wall of lust responsible for the origination of the lewd fluids that were even now wrapped around my fingers greedily swallows my intruding fingers deep into its depths. While entangling each other's tongues, I slowly reach into her lower mouth and gently scrape away the fluids that are dripping incessantly. Unable to bear such a simultaneous means of attack, Oichi-hime surrenders to my assault. Nagamasa-san. Nagamasa-san. When she began to call my name in a sweet voice that was not more than a whisper, it was a sure sign that her peak was near enough. Naturally, I wasn't going to release any pressure at this point. One hand of mine slowly slithered across her honey jar whilst the other gently patted her death even as I firmly thrust forward with my mouth into hers. She lets out moans stifled by the presence of my mouth on hers. Her walls contract and submerge my fingers within. Her waist quivers and then slowly relaxes. Her face, which turns red out of pleasure, meets mine with a shy and embarrassed expression. "Did you feel good?" When I asked so softly whilst slowly patting her head, she nods in response before burying her head into my broad chest. "Oichi, I wish to." I whisper the trailing end of my request in her ear, "Feel good." She, who is always supportive of my wants, nods gracefully even as her head is nestled within my chest. I gently lift her and then lay her onto the futon. Meanwhile, I proceed to lie down on the futon as well with my face towards the ceiling. I gently let loose my undergarments, releasing my already eager son, who was resembling like a tall spear held by a powerful warrior. Doesn't disappoint. Dawn. Without any fanfare, he stands up proudly. It was as if any moment later he would be soaring into heavens above. Oichi-hime meanwhile crawls onto her feet and gazes at my upright son with a fiery gaze. 1 month has passed since our newlywed wife began. Oichi-hime, who was pure and virtuous lady innocent of the affairs of men and women, had thoroughly fallen to the point that she actively desired to indulge in sexual intercourse with me every night. It is outrageous that a woman can indulge in pleasure. Such is the mentality of the samurai women of the Warring States period, shaped no doubt by the prevailing patriarchal attitude that was rigidly followed in this troubled and archaic era. Oichi-hime must have been no different at first. Yet after being submerged in the sea of pleasure that I gave her, she has changed to the point that she actively seeks pleasure. Much gratifying to me. To me, from the modern era where the sex industry has developed to an abnormal extent and where knowledge related to such matters has disseminated wide and far, such an occurrence was neither unexpected nor unwelcome. TL. E/N. Any comment on the Japanese sex industry? E/N. Japanese men don't want to commit into RS, 'cause they too serious about it. They even join only one company to work with for life, let alone with a partner. Obviously using these kinds of services is much easier on their mind and heart. Compared to the primitive bumpkins of the Warring States period who only knew how to thrust their sons and roughly grasp the chest of their lovers, I was far ahead in terms of knowledge and skill. The number of people who could compare to me in pleasuring a woman in this desolate era should be unable to extend single digits. I don't know if Oichi-hime, who was wedded to such a skillful person, was happy or not. "Oichi," I commanded with a soft voice. "Yes, then. Then I'll excuse myself." Swallowing her saliva in hardly suppressed excitement, she stretched her delicate fingers towards my big son. A strange smile spread across my face. Just as her hands were able to grasp my penis, I interrupted her in a gentle yet stern fashion. "Stop for a moment." Oh yes." She lowers her hand with an all too clear reluctance, emerging no doubt from the easily visible surge of lust that she is under now, which has dyed her cheeks crimson. Thus, when she turned her gaze towards me, I could see that she had already lost herself to the power of passion that had raged on ahead, akin to a waterfall surging past the heights into the depths. I sighed blissfully at that realization. My next instruction was quite apparent. "Oichi, today you use your impure body to serve your lord to the fullest." "That is," she murmurs hesitatingly. Even though the expression on her face conveys her assent to me. "Then. That is all," I whisper in an air of finality and make my next move without giving her any time to respond. Flippantly reaching for her breasts, I tease her nipples with my fingers. She gives a scream that is quite pleasing to my ears, no doubt enjoying my teasing. Even so, she promptly hides her breasts out of embarrassment. What a lovely visage she has. Especially when she behaves in a shy manner like that, it just drives my fire through the roof. I nudge her breasts gently and then say to her in a sweet voice, "Use these to serve my son as best as you can." "That. But," she murmurs indecisively as she twists her body around in an uncertain manner. "But that is so. So. Do I have to remind you that not long ago you climaxed so thoroughly and reached out to my little out of your own accord?" "No. Please don't mention." Oichi-hime, who is burning with shame, covers her crimson face with her dainty little hands. I lean forward and hug her. When I kissed her, who was unprepared for my action, although she was still embarrassed, I could see the happiness blossoming on her face. "Hey. Nudge your breasts up so that I can see your cleavage more clearly." "But." Oichi-hime continues to cover her chest with her arms. I wonder if she was feeling too embarrassed to follow my instructions. Watching my wife, whose guard was up, I decided to go for a different plan. Chapter 16.3 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sinking into Depravity, 3, Editor. Sora. I deliberately hardened my face and then began to speak in a flat, emotionless tone of voice. "Is that so?" I convey my apparent displeasure with a cold face. Upon seeing my stony expression, Oichi-hime turns frightfully pale. "In that case, let's stop for now, we shall continue some other night." "Please wait." When I stood up from the bed and pretended to leave, Oichi-hime rushed forward anxiously and hugged my feet tightly. After getting on together for so long, I understood her thoughts more or less. Like a clear lake whose interior was clearly available from the surface, the innocent Oichi-hime's thoughts could be gleaned very easily. After being cherished by me, after experiencing my love like a blossoming flower, she had matured and experienced emotions that had changed her at a fundamental level. Thus, what she feared the most was loving this love of mine that I had showered upon her. She would never have even imagined entreating me like this at the place where our hearts should be the closest to each other. Please forgive me. It is all my mistake. I never should have hesitated to receive Nagamasa-sama's favor. Please don't leave me alone. I am willing to do anything. I pretended to think and sat down on the floor with my legs crossed. Seeing my response, her face brightens in anticipation, yet it was still too soon to loose the pallor of anxiety that has shrouded it since my declaration earlier. Since you are so willing, are you willing to do what I asked? Upon hearing my inquiry, her face turned crimson out of shyness and she nodded gently. Is this all right? She asked hesitatingly in a soft voice. Oh. The scenery was so amazing that my voice leaked out involuntarily. My beloved wife, swaying in shame, is holding her hands up to her chest and gently pushing the rather impressive bulge that seems to defy gravity. The bulge shook slightly as her body trembled, and the pale pink tip danced in the air akin to a willow branch shaking in a spring breeze. What supreme scenery! That dainty body when combined with those rich breasts form an invincible combination that resonates deep with my pleasure centers. As a sign of acknowledgement, my son stands up quite proudly showing off his impressive stature as he rears into the sky. Even as saliva drips out of my mouth at the sight, I still am sane enough to command Oichi to take the next step. Grasp my son firmly and insert it there, right into your cleavage. Perhaps she was confused due to my rather strange request. Oichi, who fears of angering me, gives me those all too familiar puppy eyes. Although my heart melts at the sight, I still maintain a firm image. Didn't you hear me? Tuck my son into that impressive valley that you've got there. Yes, she blushes in embarrassment on hearing my request again. To expose the chest in front of a man and to use it to pleasure his penis, was an obscene act that was unthinkable to the conservative folk of the Warring States period. Breasts may be caressed by man during intercourse, however their main purpose in this age was to provide nutrition for the children. Thus, her initial hesitation on hearing my command. Even so, in the battlefield of competing emotions that lasted for a moment within her pretty head, it was my will that won, for she with a firm glint in her eye, grasps my son firmly, and then gently wraps it within her chest. The moment that the sensitive skin of my member grazed the soft flesh, a jolt of electricity passed right through me, causing me to involuntarily let out a moan. Wow! This is amazing! Oichi! Yes, yes! When I call out her name, my beloved wife trembles in shock and looks up at me in a frightened state. Is there something wrong with what I did? Or is my body not pleasurable enough for Nagamasa-sama? It's easy to see why those emotions would circulate in her brain. I decided to stroke the head of Oichi gently. Nagamasa-san, Oichi's face blossoms like a blooming rose of the night. Oichi, yes, it's so good, yes. Now that she is sure that I am not angry with her, the usual coy smile returns to her flushed face. When I gaze at her, I am convinced once more that you really can't stay angry at her for a long time, even as a pretense. It is just not humanly possible. Still praising her after a brief bout of anger will instill a sense of self-security in her. Deep into her psyche it will be engraved that, never again do what made him angry in the first place. Such a philosophy was used often in the training of dogs. A common name for this strategy was the so-called carrot and stick stratagem. Through the help of some elementary psychology knowledge that had disseminated far in the modern era, I could proceed full speed in my development plan to develop the ideal wife. Oichi, what is it, Nagamasa-san, look up, yes, Her assent was interrupted by my act of adhering my lips to hers. As our lips touched, I could feel a strange sense of connectivity like a thread binding her to mine, bringing us lovers ever closer to each other physically and spiritually. Looking at the blissful expression on her face, a sly gleam invaded my eye as I continued on with my relentless onslaught. Oichi, who was unused to such intensity, promptly blacked out from the sudden, intense burst of pleasure. Phew, she moaned, unable to let out the words properly, for I had seized her tongue firmly. Slowly entwining her tongue in mine, I gently fed her glistening threads of saliva from my mouth. It is well known that humans cannot swallow things when their tongue is tampered with. Thus, Oichi, who was unable to swallow, could only let out the silvery liquid that was pooling in her mouth. It was my purpose to feed her large amounts of saliva and ensure deliberately that she would be unable to swallow them all. Why? Oichi, don't swallow it, I muttered softly. On hearing me, my wife nodded tearfully even as the saliva filled her mouth. Don't let all that saliva go to waste. Let it slowly drip onto your chest. Oichi may have understood my intention. The water of love is slowly drained from the ends of her mouth and slowly drips onto the plump bulges in the front. Propped upward by her own two hands, her impressive breasts that have caught my son in between glisten with the liquid that pools over them. "You're so beautiful right now, Oichi." I whisper into her ears. "Thank you," she responds shyly. The fire in my chest rises as I contemplate my next action. NMW Chapter 16. Sinking into Depravity, 4, Editor. Sora, with this Chapter 16 has come to an end. It seems Chapter 17 has less arrow content, so updates should be faster. Part 3 has also been updated with edits. Then you can use your breasts to pleasure my son. Can't you? On hearing my request, Oichi Haim, who holds my impressive member between her bountiful breasts dripping with saliva, turns red from shyness. An act that is commonly known as paizuri, pretty popular in the developed modern world of my past where content had disseminated widely, was unthinkable in this conservative feudal age. But it has been a month since I married my wife. As someone who has witnessed the prosperity of sexual pleasure and depravity at its peak, there was no way that I was going to be satisfied with the mediocre methods of this era. To give an analogy, to someone who had got used to an expensive diet using the finest of squids in his sushi, would he just settle for the plain cucumber? TL. Kapamaki/cucumber rolls are regarded as the plainest kind of sushi. Thus, I was going to guide my wife in the right direction of learning to service me as my next step in my development plan. Oh, it feels great, is it true? While I patted Oichi Haim's head in pleasure, her movements became more and more enthusiastic on hearing my praise. Nyuchu nyuchu, nyupu nyupu. With such a sound, my gigantic son repeatedly thrusts in and out between Oichi Haim's big, soft, yet tight breasts. While stroking my wife, who eagerly worked on my penis, I couldn't help thinking that Oichi Haim, the undisputable #1 beauty of the Warring States era, is giving me a fucking service. Just considering the wonderful situation was enough to cause my member to rise up like a dragon soaring into the clouds. Too much excitement caused the thick and viscous pre-cum fluid to leak from my big son's entrance, mixing with the saliva and eventually transforming into a more obscene lotion. That is amazing, slimy. The effect turned out to be clinching for Oichi Haim. Her moans flowed out in a sweet burst as she climaxed rapidly. My sperm had been bathing her womb for the past month, and slowly but surely her body had adapted to react to its appearance and odor. By the way, precum is practically no different from semen, since sperm is present in the fluid as well. Even if precum is passed into the vagina, there is a possibility of pregnancy. One of my friends had a rather smart friend idea of getting his girlfriend, who detested physical contact, to sexual intercourse. He thought that masturbating while naked and then showing her his penis would do the trick. Who knew that a short while later, a DNA test revealed that his girlfriend had become pregnant? Naturally, it was due to the precum. It was at this moment the two virgins had realized that their innocuous activity had caused them to become mommy and daddy in a single step. The lesson is, don't underestimate precum. The fact that the precipitating liquid clung to Oichi Haim's chest meant that my sperm, which was eagerly assaulting her soft meat, was desperately attempting to make her pregnant. Her chest is being attacked not only by my penis but also by sperm, and my beloved wife, Oichi Haim, who has inhaled the smell of the runny milky white liquid, shows an ecstatic expression. Wow! Oichi, it feels really good. Thank you. Oichi Haim's actions get even hotter. The occasional tingling sensation I feel is probably due to the tightness of her nipples. Even though my wife was hesitant, she was completely engrossed in the chest service. It seems that the smell of my precum has the potential to excite her. Which was great progress in my wife development plan. Since we have reached this point, the next step was obviously, fellatio. Now that I have got my wife to do paizuri for the first time, my mind was running at a full speed. My son, who could not bear it anymore, reared like a horse charging on the battlefield. Due to Oichi Haim's enthusiasm, my member completely overhangs. The stiffness caused by the multitude of veins pulsating under muscle was clearly visible. Nagamasa. San. It is getting bigger, oh. I'm gonna let it out, I groaned even as my hand rubbed my wife's head continuously. Feeling the uncontrollable urge, I gave my next instructions immediately. Apply more pressure using your chest. Rub it faster and faster. Yes, yes. Nyupu nyupu, nururunuru, nyuchu nyuchu. While making a violent sound that resembled a river raging over protruding rocks, my member clamped among the soft mountains present in my wife's chest slowly reached the finish line of its race. I'll let them out. Oichi. Use your mouth to devour them all. Not giving her any time to think, I held Oichi Haim's head down with one hand and ejaculated grandly while handling the penis with the other hand. My semen that was released suddenly is scattered on Oichi Haim's face, throat, and clavicle, all the way down to her chest. Milky white liquid completely covered her face and upper body. Ah, it's useless, Oichi Haim murmurs with a hazy expression on her face that was so mesmerizing at that instant. She desperately scooped the semen that was spread all over her upper body and then rubbed it against her nether region. Her finger crawled into a pool of semen that had accumulated in her clavicle and then slowly spreads the same dripping finger all across her vagina. Seeing this, my inactive member begins to rage again. Oichi, do you want my semen? When I pushed down my wife who was covered with semen, she pleaded with a sly face. I want Nagamasa-sama's splendid seed. I want, where? I asked her with a wretched expression on my face. Feeling my hot breath on her tender face, her slender lashes quiver. Her face turns red even as she spits out her response in a whisper, in my pussy. After a month of repeated intercourse and impartment of knowledge, it seems that the words that I had suggested that she incorporate into her vocabulary had become a part of her involuntary usage. Is that so? In that case, show that place to me using your fingers. On hearing my command, my wife who was covered with the obscene odor of semen obeys my orders while showing a prominent sex appeal. Using her fingers, she slowly prized open the hole that dripped in semen and love juices, all for me to see. I pressed the glands of my son against her vagina, ripe for insertion at the right time. But, out of my control, my son suddenly slid into the insides of Oichi Haim. Ah, yes. Oichi Haim had moved her hips and invited my member into her womb. All by herself. My development had paid off. Ich. This erotic wife. While swinging my hips to grasp the rhythm as the gentle honey pot grasped my son into its depths, I held on to her waist and thrust forcefully. Unlike the dignified beauty of the day, she showed a different side of her beauty then. The raging lust and the throes of passion that cause her waist to twist around my own as our bodies merge into one brings forth a different sort of beauty. Under the dim light, what is left is a pure land of bliss. A world of pleasure and depravity that I am happy to sink into. Forevermore. Ah, it feels good. While swaying her robust chest, the princess of the Odas, whose beauty was boasted as the first in the era, was behaving like a nymphomaniac, trying her best to absorb the impressive girth that I possessed. Her white skin is flushed, and her long, flowing locks of black hair stick to the skin wet with semen and sweat. And those eyes that seemed to hide a world within them, they were owned by me. Regardless of how gentle or violent I was, those eyes would always meet with mine. Her cries would only be of her name. Deep within those orbs, I could see my own soul reflected in pristine white. Ah, there. Responding to any stimulus on my part, her sensitive waist shakes quickly in response. Her body, which craved for my seed, eagerly awaited its arrival by catering to each and every need of mine. While pulling myself outward for a bit, I traced the lining of her opening with a single finger. Her body writhes and spasms even as her whole contracts in expectation. Unconcerned by the climax that she has reached, I used my finger to prise open her walls, reach deep into the opening and then gently rub the insides. Deep. Nagamasa. San. My wife hugs me as the passion wreaks havoc through her being. I patted her head while raising her gently so that we were sitting face to face. I grab her plump butt with both of my hands and give it a firm squeeze. She hugs me even harder and her two impressive mounds nearly squeeze the last bit of air within me. Her nipples felt hard, I noted in passing. Nagamasa-san, Nagamasa-san. She sought a kiss from me and entwined her tongue with mine. An obscene sound echoes when she squeezes, and she tries to take up all the saliva from my mouth and drink it up. The esophagus had remembered the pleasure of swallowing. While concurrently shaking her waist, seeing the chaotic state of my wife made my desire to ejaculate even greater. My son, which had swelled up to an impressive width, was indicating that it was time to disperse the seeds. I'll put it out. Oichi. Where do you want it? Now, it is not the time to play with riddles, and I decided to satisfy my wife's desire. I want to become pregnant. I want Nagamasa's seed flowing into the insides of my body. I was completely captivated by this cute begging and decided to devour her inner part till the time I ejaculate. Her arms are swung around my back and her both legs are wrapped around my waist. Ah, no, 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 what is it? Oichi. No, no. I want to go, please let me. Oichi desperately begged for a reprieve, but I only gave her a wicked smile in response. Time to put it in. I grin even as my member rears up. Okay, get pregnant with my child. I matched the timing of my ejaculation with the contractions of her walls and then firmly poured all of my semen deep into her vagina. I could feel that each time I poured a part of my essence she strengthened her ability to hold them within. It was as if that she was as reluctant to part with any part of my being. Inside me. A lot of Nagamasa-sans. My wife muttered incomprehensibly while her face blushed the same color as a ripe tomato. Pulling out my son from her vagina. There was a sense of accomplishment that I could not express in words. I gently hug my wife and stroke her body that was heating up at that instant like a fiery furnace. Nagamasa. San. What happened? When I drop a kiss on Oichi's lips, she puts her hands on my chest, whispering in a mellow voice, clinging tightly to me. Thank you. She kissed my chest once and then stroked her tummy with a blissful expression on her face. It was as if she was convinced of something.